Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike.
This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly.
History doesn't have to be boring, buttoned up, or inaccessible. And it certainly didn't end in 1945. It belongs to all of us, and we share and add to it every day. Welcome to the History A Go-Go podcast, where I interview interesting guests, cover a motley crew of topics, and it's a place where you can sit, think, and drink all at the same time. I'm your host, Rob Mellon.
We will no longer use American military might to construct democracies in faraway lands or try to rebuild other countries in our own image. Those days are now over. Instead, we will work with allies and partners to protect our shared interests. We are not asking others to change their way of life, but to pursue common goals that allow our children to live better and safer lives. This principled realism will guide our decisions moving forward. Military power alone will not bring peace to Afghanistan or stop the terrorist threat arising in that country. But strategically applied force aims to create the conditions for a political process to achieve a lasting peace. America will work with the Afghan government as long as we see determination and progress. However, our commitment is not unlimited, and our support is not a blank check.
My guest today is author and Marine combat veteran Bing West. He is the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs during the Reagan administration. He was an infantry officer in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War, and he is the author of a dozen books, including The Strongest Tribe, War, Politics, and the Endgame in Iraq, The Wrong War, Grit, Strategy, and the Way Out of Afghanistan, Into the Fire, a first-hand account of the most extraordinary battle in the Afghan War, which he co-authored with Medal of Honor winner Dakota Meyer, and Call Sign Chaos, Learning to Lead, the #1 New York Times bestseller by Jim Mattis and Bing West. His most recent work is The Last Platoon, a novel of the Afghanistan War, and that will be our topic of discussion today. Of The Last Platoon, the LA Times proclaims, Bing West is the Grunt's Homer, and we are very pleased to have the decorated Marine and prolific author with us today. Welcome, Bing.
Thank you, Rob.
So your book, The Last Platoon, is actually a novel about the war in Afghanistan. But as you look through it, it seems to me that these are based on real characters and maybe from your past, not even from the war in Afghanistan.
Well, basically, I've fought in 3 wars and written a dozen books about our grunts in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And I've been to so many battlefields and been it so long. But I have to tell you, as I watched, I made, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 years going back and forth to Afghanistan, going with the platoons up north and then down south. And I talked to the generals and I'd say, this is nuts. I had a combined action platoon in Vietnam and we knew what we were doing. But having our platoons scattered all over Afghanistan when they have no interaction whatsoever with this Pashtun tribe that hates our guts, and the Pashtuns are benefiting from the drug trade, what the hell do we think we're doing? And finally, I just got so fed up with it. I had written 3 books about Afghanistan, and I said, all right, I'm going to write a novel so that I can tell the real truth. And yes, I'll change some of the names. So you're quite right, Rod. Every single character in that book, The Last Platoon, is a real human being whom I knew on the battlefields. Every one of them, and in the Pentagon, because I was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security under President Reagan. So I know the people in the White House as well. So I I tried to write a metaphor so that if somebody reads The Last Platoon, it's about action. It's about what happens when a very small platoon of Marines are sent in on temporary duty. The war is over, and they're just there for a short amount of time, and they have a few CIA special operatives with them, and it's supposed to be just in and out in a week. That's it. That's what the president has been promised, etc. And then to show people what really happens on the ground and how quickly it explodes and how the people in Washington can't comprehend what's really occurring out there. And then I try to show it from the Taliban side, what they're doing, and then the drug lords, and then the people who are making all the money in Pakistan and Iran. So I try to show what happens from the point of view of those who are fighting, and then all the way up the chain of command on both the enemy side and on our side.
Bing, it is tradition here to accompany the conversation with a special brew. Today we have Semper 5PA from the Stars and Stripes Brewing Company of Freeport, Maine. Stars and Stripes is a veteran-owned craft brewery that donates a percentage of all of their proceeds to veteran organizations. Semper 5PA is their flagship beer that offers an earthy, woodsy flavor with strong bitterness for the toughest of devil dogs. Remember, the best way to enjoy the podcast is with one of our featured brews. I would also like to ask you to subscribe to the podcast. Subscribing is the only way to get the newest episodes right away. And to all the current followers and listeners from 1,000 cities from around the globe, I have to say thank you. And now I raise my Semper 5PA very high. And to all of those who have served the Stars and Stripes in some of the harshest conditions on the planet, especially those that gave the last full measure of devotion, I have to say, cheers. So you were working in the Defense Department going back to the 1980s, and Afghanistan was not stable at that time either. What was your assessment at that time, and have we learned anything from that time period in the 80s to today?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I was there, the CIA, whom I got on very well with, they came to me and they said, "Hey, Bing, how about throwing in some money for us to help the Mujahideen?" So I went to Secretary Weinberger and Secretary Colucci, and the CIA wanted us to transfer some funds and our Stinger missiles, and we did. The interesting thing is that then the operatives, whom I knew very well, they told me, Bing, we're not really delivering these directly to the Mujahideen. I said, what are you doing? They said, well, we go to Pakistan. Pakistan then decides who among the Mujahideen are going to get the weapons. Then they bring them in, and it's the Pakistani trainers who are there with the Mujahideen. And I said, so the Pakistanis are the cutout. And they said, the cutout? They said, they're the guys, the power behind the throne.
That's right, yeah.
And they said, this is going to work, thing. We're going to drive the Russians out. Okay, we did. And then, I left government. Everyone ignored what was happening in Afghanistan. We knew that the Taliban were radical punks, but they didn't seem to be affecting us. And then, boom, everything blows up many years later. But it was the same religiosity, the same costumes that had been fighting the Russians were fighting us. I mean, I'll just say it. It's a tribe hurtling headlong into the 9th century.
Yeah.
Right from the start, one of my other books was called The Wrong War, where I bring people on the battlefields and show them what's happening. And I've gone into the White House time after time and said, this is crazy, under different presidents, under President Bush, President Obama. It made absolutely no sense that we were going to build a nation out of those tribes, and yet we persisted for so long. And I think two things were happening. The first was we were so wealthy, so unbelievably wealthy, we couldn't believe that we couldn't do the job. And the other thing, God bless the military, but you have to be careful. The military are imbued with this, I'll do the job regardless, period.
Yes, that's right.
You know from the Army, I know from the Marines, you'll never get promoted if you walk in and say to your colonel, hey, Colonel, this is stupid. That's the end of you. So we had a problem that the can-do spirit of the military and their unwillingness to acknowledge when something was just nuts. And so I tried to put this in the novel so people could read it and understand it.
This reminds me, a book that's impacted me. I think it's an excellent book from the past, and it's years and years old now. It's called A Bright Shining Lie about Vietnam. The first part of that book is really about the challenge of the soldiers there with a force that has more power and is better trained and still is losing. And so when I was reading the accounts of what's happening in Afghanistan, where the Afghan police or army, even though they have better equipment and are better trained and even have better leadership in many cases, are still losing. And it reminded me of that first part of A Bright Shining Lie.
Well, I spent years in Vietnam, and as I said, I had a combined action platoon there, and we did quite well. I have a different take on it, Rob, and that is that we actually, in 1970, you could drive practically anywhere in a Jeep in South Vietnam. I mean, quite different than what we're Afghanistan. But then when we pulled out, we made two promises to the South Vietnamese that we would give them the money and the equipment, and that we would bomb the hell out of the North Vietnamese if they came back. Gradually, South Vietnam fell. But the idea, I lived in a Vietnamese village, and we'd move every night to a different hooch, and then we'd go out and fight the Viet Cong, so the Viet Cong didn't know where we were. You couldn't do that in Afghanistan. The entire society was quite different. So I don't mix Vietnam and Afghanistan, except in one way, and the same is true of Iraq. One thing about all of them is that two things happened. The mood in our country and the mood in Congress, especially among the Democrats, changed. That's it. Changed. I mean, like now, President Biden said, we'll just leave it. We've done that in 3 wars. And it's not healthy. It's just not healthy. And the president has entirely too much power in a way, and the Congress can't be relied upon. I mean, we're tying ourselves in knots. And so in the novel of The Last Platoon, I try to show that at the top, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the President, the only thing they really want to do is get the hell out of there. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, but unfortunately it's true.
The soldiers there and the Marines there, they know what the problems are. They can see it. They deal with it. They don't know specifically what's going on, as you mentioned, in a lot of these tribes because there's just not that many military personnel, U.S. military personnel actually out there. But in regards to knowing what the problems are, I think they've identified those. The solutions, though, are much harder to achieve. If the solution is these forces, these Afghan soldiers or police need a sense of nationalism, I think you're just barking up the wrong tree. I just don't think that's possible to create.
Well, you basically said it. I don't know. Over the course of my lifetime, I've been on probably, 300, 400, 500 patrols. I don't know. But when you are out there, you know, because you are keyed up to stay alive. I mean, that's the one thing every rifleman is. He's focused on who's liable to shoot me? What am I liable to step on out here?
Sure.
And so his senses are keen. And you can tell when people don't like you. I mean, you can tell when people just hate you. And if you do something wrong, make a wrong mistake, boom. And we go through villages and they'd be flying kites and they'd be, well, there were different words for them, but they would be sitting on the stone walls looking at you, and they had their ICOMs out and they were reporting on what you were doing as you walked along. And you had to allow them to do this. The system on the government side was broken because of the tribalism and because of a degree of corruption that we just refused to acknowledge was there. Everyone was on the take. So the whole project, but what I learned and what I tried to do in The Last Platoon was to say, you don't bitch when you're on a battlefield. You get out there, and I tried to show what leadership is all about with the captain who was in charge by the name of Cruz, who actually is a Marine I knew in Sangin or the platoon. And what Cruz had to do, and I tried to show, he had to get his Marines to fight. He had to try to keep them alive. He had to deal with a colonel who just wanted to be promoted to general. He had then to deal with some of the Afghan soldiers that wanted a share of the dope, of the heroin, and try to make it all about leadership when you're put into that kind of a position. Okay, you don't like it, but here you are. And I have one line in there where one of the corporals is complaining about something, and so Captain Cruz says, well, I'll tell you how it is, Corporal. He said, the Commandant hasn't called me recently, so I have to kind of figure it out for myself down here. But when you look at me, you better think you're looking at the Commandant, because that's how the chain of command works. And we're not going to be like those. Then he went on to say, there was really a good Netflix presentation of a Danish platoon that was down in that area. And gradually they patrolled less and less because they had some people blown up, the opposite of what the Marines do. But these Danish guys, they were good guys. But then came that point when they had lost someone. And the platoon commander, the Danish platoon commander in this film, it was real, turned to his men and he said, well, I know some of you don't want to go out. So those who don't want to go out, just tell me, and no hard feelings. And those who come with me, come with me. And then I had Cruz say, now, I just want you to know that's how they do things in Denmark, but in the United States Marine Corps, here's how we do it. We all share the same mission. And none of us say, well, you want to do and I do what I want to do. We're all going to go through this mission and we're all going to do our best. And that's one of the lessons I try to bring home. Okay, yeah, sometimes you dealt a bad hand in life. You still do your best.
And I know what you're saying about the difference between Vietnam and Afghanistan, and I'm not trying to force that comparison. But when you talk about the corruption of the government, trying to get individuals to support a very corrupt entity when it's very visible that there's corruption, that's hard to do.
Yes, but that wasn't Vietnam. That was Iraq. I mean, ironically, and now the press is very ashamed of it for itself to a certain extent, but the press never gets ashamed of itself. They just move on to other stuff.
They're always right.
But when all those supposed corrupt generals who had all the dope and had all the gold in Vietnam, those who managed to get out, they came here. Guess what they became? Taxi cab drivers. They had nothing. Vietnam had nothing. Vietnam did not have much dope at all.
Right. And
no gold. All I had was rice. And so their corruption was much, much less than most nations in the world. Because they didn't have too much, and they didn't have that. They weren't as venal. Now, Iraq was an entirely different story. I mean, Iraq, once the Sunnis and Shias, of course, hated each other, and we bungled that. But once the Shias got into power, wow. Did they stick it to the Sunnis, and then they began to use every job where you were paid with American money. That was something that they all wanted, and they shared it based upon whether you were Shiite or Sunni, and that's what caused that state to come apart. And now the question is whether we're really going to stay in Iraq or whether Iraq becomes a vassal state for Iran. And I wrote several books about that too, but of all of them, the Last Platoon, I think, is my best writing, where I really tried to get people into the act, get a reader into the action, and at the same time have the reader understand when he's finished the book and say, now I know why we could never win there.
I think at times, and you mentioned this, that we're so financially powerful, like how can't we accomplish this? We can accomplish pretty much anything else by spending our way. This is not that type of situation. Do you think that's a problem with policy, or had been a problem with the policy in Afghanistan, that we just tried to spend our way out of the problem?
In both Iraq and Afghanistan, yes. The generals became benevolent warlords, dispensing with money. The amount of money that we had in both of those countries that we were spending on projects because it made us feel good, to build a school, to build a road, to build a sewer. We tried to do everything for them and use our money and say, okay, I had cases where You'd be out with a platoon commander. And both in Iraq and Afghanistan, you have to keep the canals free of weeds that'll keep growing up all the time, obviously. Otherwise, it just clogs off. So it used to be that every village in both countries, everyone would have to donate some manpower to clean out the weeds twice a year. Fine. We came along and we began to say, okay, we'll pay you. We thought we were being nice about it. Well, guess what happened? I actually was there when this platoon commander is trying to determine how much money he has to pay the villagers for them to clean out their own canals. I mean, I almost laughed or cried. I mean, it was bizarre. We thought we could do everything just by giving people money and thinking that they'd do the right thing. They didn't.
Was there ever a time in that, which is now America's longest war, where there was glimmers of hope, where if we had taken a different path, maybe the outcome would have been different than it is today? Or were we always at this slow, methodical point, this is the direction we're going and there's no way to change it? Like the event horizon of a black hole, that we've reached the event horizon and no matter what we do at that point, we're just going to the center.
There was this terrific chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff by the name of Joe Dunford, who's from Quincy, Massachusetts, not Quincy, Illinois. I thought it was Joe calling when it was you. But Joe Dunford was in charge of our forces over there in about 2014. And he said to me, Bing, he said, we're finished with nation building. Starting in 2014, he said, we're shutting that down. The only thing we're going to do is train the Afghan army, cut back. The interesting thing, and this is what I'm sad about what President Biden did. Most people don't realize, but do you know in the last 18 months, not one American soldier has been killed in Afghanistan. Not one. And the amount of money we're now spending there a year is about $85 billion. Now, we've gotten to the point where $85 billion is a rounding error, the way we're spending money. And we had given up the countryside, but we still had the cities. And every day, our special forces and aircraft were killing the terrorists every single day. And they couldn't lay a glove on us because we had built up through the CIA, a terrific intelligence system throughout that country. And anytime they would gather, whack, we'd hit them. It got so that the Al-Qaeda guys, now they call themselves ISIS, the Al-Qaeda put out the word, no three of them could go together to a tea house. Now imagine that. Because during the daytime, they don't have much to do, and all of them just love to hang around, sip tea, and shoot the bull. I mean, they really do. And now they said, no three of you can gather because you're going to be zapped if you do that. And yet, we then had arrived, in my judgment, in the last 18 months in Afghanistan to a level where we weren't trying to do anything more except kill the terrorists and keep the army together and then allow time to go by. And if you look at the example of South Korea, where we still have 30,000 troops, South Korea in 1954-55, after the troops, was an absolute mess. And they were even still having gunfights in 1978 in their White House, shooting at each other. I think we could have stayed there off the newspapers without losing people and with having damn little skin in the game, but really having a forward outpost, kind of like Rome would have certain forward outposts, and it wouldn't have cost us that much. But unfortunately, we chose quit. And once you quit, the way President Biden now has quit, there is a loss of your prestige in the world. We may not want to admit it, but the rest of the world is watching this. So I'm sorry in the end that we pulled the plug because we didn't have to. Afghanistan was no longer an issue to any American. It had disappeared.
Now, I'm not here to stand up for President Biden.
Sure.
But in his defense, if you're given the position he's been given, where they've whittled it down so significantly, he's like, What are we doing? We don't have hardly anyone here. The Taliban's taking control of these provinces that we used to have control over, and we're not affecting the country like I think we should. We don't have the force there to do it. What are we doing? It's been narrowed down so far, it's almost like the decision almost was made for him. Just in his defense in that regard, wasn't it whittled down to the point where it's like, why are we even here if this is what's left?
No, I'd argue the opposite. My friend Jim Mattis, who's the four-star general, in charge of Central Command, et cetera, and Joe Dunford, the chairman of Joint Chiefs, and Scott Miller, who's our general over there now, who was a special operations guy. They said, look, that's all we need there. All we need is 2,000 Americans. Then NATO puts in 2,000. That makes 4,000. Then we have 2,000 contractors. NATO has 2,000. That's 8,000 altogether. We have our aircraft. We have our intelligence system. We can whack the living daylights out of these terrorists anytime they come together, and they know it. We don't have to control the countryside. They're not going to take Kabul, and we can continue this forever until things improve on our favor because we're not losing anybody.
Right.
You see, if we're still a war where we're losing people, that would be an argument for saying, hey, this isn't working. But for the last 18 months, we finally figured out how to keep the other side off balance, and we're not doing the fighting anymore. The Afghan soldiers are. They've given up an awful lot, sure. But Kabul was still there. We could have held on there indefinitely.
What role does the drug trade have in the poppy fields, and who controls those?
Well, in the book, I try to go into this, but in the book, I don't talk like this in the book. In the book, it's just an action book, and all this kind of stuff is inferred, but I try to get people interested in the characters and what's happening.
Sure.
And where the CIA Special Operations guys, whom I'm very fond of, there's a very small group, Special Activities Division. They are over there, but there are only 3 or 4 of them, and they're in with the Marine Platoon. But they're there to get this Iranian drug lord, because Iran gets a lot of money out of there, and embarrass Iran by catching him with 1,000 kilos of heroin and then bringing him back and then putting him on trial. So that's what they're after. But I'm trying to show that what happens is there are hundreds of thousands of workers in the poppy fields that are tens of thousands of acres in each province that grow 2 crops a year. And farmers aren't poor. The farmers are wealthy. The farmers are earning between $5,000 and $15,000 a year. Now you might say, "Oh my gosh!" But $5,000 to $15,000 a year in Afghanistan. You have they love riding motorcycles. Everyone has a motorcycle. They have their tractors. They have their colored TV sets. They have their cell phones. They have rugs on the walls. They have, really good windows. If the houses of these people who are involved in the drug trade, some of them are absurd, and they show a lack of taste because they become too big, and they don't need all of that. But everyone's involved. And the kickbacks, well, the Taliban insist upon 15%, basically. That's what they want. And the Kabul government gets 7%. And everyone on the chain of command, from the farmer on up, he gets his cut. And the whole thing is perfectly organized. The opium is converted into heroin. Then it goes out through Pakistan into Iran, then from Iran up into the Balkans, and through the Balkans into Russia and Western Europe. And it's about 40% of the gross national product of Afghanistan is heroin.
Wow.
I believe that corrupts a nation. And by that, I'd say in every village, you have some that are hooked. You have to be damn careful because they are taking the buds of the opium and collecting them by hand, scraping them off the beautiful flowers. And if you are in contact with that too much and don't take care, you gradually can become addicted, but others then begin to into smoking it in a pipe, etc. And so I'd say there were studies, but I'm not really sure, but anywhere from 10 to 17%, that might be a little bit high, say 7%, in any village you're in, are addicts. So they know, everyone knows that what they're doing is poisoning people. That's the business they're in. And while they claim to be pious Islam, they know they are doing something that would be disapproved by their own God. They know that, but none of them can give up the money they're getting from it, and it is spread throughout the entire society.
There's no fixing that. I mean, how do you fix that?
No,
it seems
we can't.
Almost impossible.
We cannot. We cannot. Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen eventually is fentanyl is going to replace heroin. It's already happening. Look, what was it? 90,000 Americans died last year from fentanyl. 90,000? Holy smokes!
Yeah.
No one even pays any attention to it. That has been replacing cocaine and heroin. So you say, what do I see as a solution? It's not a solution. It's that fentanyl is less expensive to make, and therefore the drug trade will become more fentanyl and less heroin.
Okay. Yeah. None of that sounds good, Bing.
No, Rob. None of that is good.
And then the other thing is Pakistan. Obviously, our relationship with Pakistan is complicated. I actually worked with Pakistani forces when I was in Saudi Arabia. We were kind of separated. I didn't agree with their training methods, but hey, they were doing their thing and we were doing ours. But there were times where we'd cross over, like they helped our rappel tower at one time. They were very proficient, actually. Was there anything that could have been done if we had developed some sort of better relationship in Pakistan?
The answer is yes. Now, when I was in the Pentagon International Security, I got along very well with my Pakistani counterparts when I went to Islamabad, etc. If you look at Pakistan objectively, you're looking at most nations have a military, and Pakistan, the military has a nation. The military is the elite who keep total control and are well paid, but they have no comprehension how to run a country. And therefore, do you know that in the Pakistan's economy and the government services, there's no taxation inside Pakistan? Imagine that. So you might say, well, where do they get their money? They get their money, they've been getting their money basically from the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia, and also on the dole from the World Bank. But by themselves, they're stuck in this time warp where they consider the Hindus, in 1948, when the British just abruptly said, we're going to divide India into two sections, the one section being Hindu, which is India, and then the rest of you can go to a place we're going to call Pakistan because you're Muslim, and millions died in the course of less than a year. The enmity between the two of them has never ceased. Never.
Right.
And it won't today. So Pakistan is a confused, if you got inside the minds of the military in Pakistan, it would scare you because there's no way out. It's like you're into this time warp where things just don't make sense to you, let alone to anybody else. So the answer is having a better relationship with them at the beginning? No. What I think we should have done at the beginning was very, very simple. We had trapped Al-Qaeda in the Tora Bora Mountains in December of 2001, right at the start of the war. We had them trapped. And that's why we had gone there to kill Al-Qaeda. But unfortunately, General Franks had one of two choices. The first was he could use General Mattis, who happened to be a Marine, who had the special forces under him, because they had somehow gotten into Afghanistan, the Marines, and there were 4,000 of them. And they said, we can surround the mountains and starve out the Al-Qaeda and systematically kill them all. The other option was to turn to the Afghan tribes and say, you take care of Al-Qaeda. And for whatever reason, General Franks decided he wasn't going to use the American Marines. He was going to use The Afghans? So, of course, the Afghans cut a deal with al-Qaeda, and al-Qaeda escaped out of the mountains into Pakistan. And we stopped. Looking back, I swear, because I said it then, I would have said, if I were the advisor to the president, Mr. President, we're not stopping. Pakistanis are scared to death that we're going to take after them for this. They're not going to do anything. We're going in there and we're going to crush al-Qaeda because al-Qaeda's on the run. And once the word gets out, you're involved with al-Qaeda, you're going down. They're going to be in the middle of the winter. They're going to close all the doors to them and we can finish this. But we didn't. We stopped at the border. So I wouldn't have said to the Pakistanis, hey, I want to be nice to you. I want to be diplomatic. I would have said, you get in my way and I'm going to steamroll you. And they would have gotten out of our way. I'm sorry, I'm a Marine.
No. I mean, that's okay. Yeah, that's definitely okay. I think there's a lot of soldiers that would have shared that type of perspective, that why are you sending Afghans in to finish a job that, obviously we know now they can't do. I read an article one time. They had clipped out this conversation between an Afghan officer and a Taliban officer, and they were arguing with each other on the radio. And the Taliban officer says to the Afghan officer, well, you're just a puppet of the Americans. And the Afghan officer replies back, well, you're just a puppet of the Pakistanis. Well, then the Taliban officer says, yes, but Americans are infidels. And according to this article, the Afghan officer did not reply. Is that part of the problem?
In many ways, yes. The fact is that Islam religion does not have a pope. It's not like the Catholic Church where there's a hierarchy that you have bishops, etc. So you can have many different views of what Islam really is, but one of the tenets is that the infidels are not equal to Islam. They're a Muslim. They're not. Period. There's no such thing as all men are created equal. No. That's not how they look at the world. So when arguments like this begin, it is very telling that one Muslim will still in the end say to the other one, yeah, but you're with the infidels. And that really hurts because we're lesser. We are lesser in their view than any other Muslim. But at the same time, I must say that the conversations, every time you're out anytime you're out in the village, when you get on the ICOM, they all buy the icons from Radio Shack, that kind of thing, just simple little devices. Everyone works. And the same on your cell phones. Yeah, they shout back and forth with each other all the time. And then they try to use cute little codes about what they're going to do. And they try to deceive you and try to deceive. It happens squad level, at the platoon level. It goes on all the time. But right now, the Taliban basically is saying to the Afghan soldiers, we've won. It's over. Now, if you quit now, I won't kill you. But if you continue to fight, I'm going to get you and I'm going to get your family. And so right now, I have friends, interpreters that, just before I was talking with you, I was trying to set up another one, getting them on these planes because the society now is turning on each other. And entire neighborhoods, they're looking around to say who worked with the Americans. And they're the ones they're going to put on the chopping block. So just pulling out abruptly like this, we're not going to see much of it because our reporters are going to leave too. Do you know that when Vietnam fell, almost 1 million Vietnamese came to the United States? 1 million. And now they're totally integrated, doing very well. The Asian Americans do very well in America. But we'll be lucky if we get out 10,000 or 20,000 of the Afghans who helped us. Not 1 million. I mean, wow. And a lot of people over there are going to die.
I believe in American ideals, and I think inherently people want to have a decision over what their life is going to be. So I think people inherently want freedom, but it's not something that you can just create overnight. Do you think that part of the issue that had developed in Afghanistan is when we tried to democratize it as if all you have to do is have an election and now you have freedom and democracy?
I don't think it's possible. Give it 50 or 60 or 70 years.
Right, yes.
Maybe, the way we did in Korea or something.
So what do you see as the future for Afghanistan then? Obviously, if the United States pulls out, the current Afghan government hasn't been too successful in their efforts to maintain those provinces that had been gained by American forces in the past. What do you think is going to happen in the next, say, 2 to 3 to 4 years?
2 to 3 to 4 years? I'd say the next 2 to 3 to 4 months. I think Kabul is going to fall. I think that President Karzai, who I think was a despicable president, he's always saying, "Oh, we have to work with the Taliban." I think he'll run like a scared rabbit and go to his villa in Doha. And 5 months from now, we'll never again hear about Afghanistan. Our press will simply shut it down because it's embarrassing, and we'll never hear it in the United States. But in the rest of the world, it's a blow against us because we quit in the end, and people are going to say you were beaten. And we didn't have to quit, but we quit. And if you're going to be the strongest power in the world, you have to recognize there's a consequence out of this. But we're going to try to run away from that as far as we can, and the press will do their best because they're very pro-President Biden. The press will do their best to indicate Afghanistan just never happened. I think that's what's going to happen.
So who fills the vacuum?
Well, I mean, what do you ever hear about Tajikistan or Uzbekistan? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
What happened to all those stands?
Right.
They just, what do we care? You know, like Outer Mongolia. Boy, do they have problems in Outer Mongolia. I mean, they do, but who's going to get upset about Outer Mongolia? You know, so that's what's going to happen, I think, to Afghanistan.
Well, thanks, Bing. I really appreciate it. The book is The Last Platoon, a novel of the Afghanistan War. It's filled with action, and of course, it's an excellent interpretation of what's going on at that level, at the platoon level. So thank you very much, Bing.
Thank you, Rob. God bless.
I would like to thank my guest today, the Grunt's Homer, Bing West. And if you would like to get his book, The Last Platoon, a novel of the Afghanistan War, simply click on the link in the description below. The featured brew was Semper 5PA from the Stars and Stripes Brewing Company of Freeport, Maine. Once again, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the podcast. And I have to say thank you to the legion of listeners and followers from over 70 countries and hundreds of cities across America. The music was provided by the great North Carolina band Bones Fork. They are also a group of military veterans, and I urge you to check out their link. It's in the description below as well. If you would like more information on the podcast, like the History A Go-Go Facebook page. There's a lot of great information there. There are many more great episodes on the way, with discussions on NASA's Mercury program, the amazing First Crusade, and many, many more. So join us again next time when we talk, think, and drink on History A Go-Go.
You know, we'll be much more formidable to our adversaries and competitors over the long term if we fight the battles for the next 20 years, not the last 20. And finally, the main argument for staying longer is what each of my 3 predecessors have grappled with. No one wants to say that we should be in Afghanistan forever, but they insist now is not the right moment to leave. In 2014, NATO issued a declaration affirming that Afghan security forces would from that point on have full responsibility for this country's security by the end of that year. That was 7 years ago. So when will it be the right moment to leave? 1 more year? 2 more years? 10 more years? 10, 20, $30 billion more than the trillion we've already spent? Not now. That's how we got here.